Hello and welcome to the second of the video lessons, starting with the usual warning. This is not here to simply reel off lots and lots of specific facts. You must have specific facts in your essays. You must have them to illustrate your points. However, you can get those from textbooks, you can get those from the reading on a K drive. These sessions are designed to give you the analysis, the arguments, the reasoning, the exceptions, the analytical flourishes, and the depth of argument which you are required to in order to achieve the A and A star. So, there will be very little specific facts in here, but you must do those in your own research to support these conclusions. We today are looking at the Balfour government. Now this can be a standalone question, usually around the idea as was it a failure, sometimes specialising on the tariff reform, sometimes not. Implicit to this though is that this is also technically a paragraph in the Why Did 1906 Happen essay. So you also need to bear in mind how might this contribute to the 1906 defeat. So, Balfour, he is not a bad man. He is not a cruel man. He is perhaps a bad leader, but not a bad man. I mean, arguing moral judgments of this period are just largely pointless anyway. But he is underpinned by his laissez-faire, which you should hopefully know from the last video or the first video lessons, approach towards government and the economy. He is the classic 19th century individualist. Okay, he does not believe the state should get involved. It will only encourage laziness, it will only encourage efficiencies, it will only encourage enterprise. He is a conservative of his age, therefore. Now, arguably, he is a poor leader because his approach as the detached academic is very much not what one needs to be a good Tory. A good Tory in this era is a man who has the confidence of his party. The Tory backbenchers are quite rebellious at this period. You need to be a upfront, handshaking, how sir, well met sort of chap. And Balfour doesn't quite capture this, and this is often the root of many of his issues. So, what I'm about to explain in lots of detail, I will not explain in as much detail again, but I expect that you know it for those ones, because this idea is key to making sure that you do well in a success question. If you just go, this is successful, look at this thing, this is successful, look at this thing, this is not successful, then in your conclusion count up how many times you said successful, how many times you said not successful, and the one with the majority is your conclusion is successful, you are technically right, but you are not getting the A and A star because you're not showing off to some extent. What makes someone successful is largely arbitrary. There's nothing intrinsically successful in government action. Okay? You need to, in your essay, particularly if you want to show off, decide how are you going to judge him. You might even want to mention that in your introduction, certainly in conclusion. Okay? But at the very least in your head. Because actually you can judge someone differently and by different criteria. And against one criteria they might be unsuccessful, against another criteria they might be successful. What normally happens is one criteria shows they're really successful, really unsuccessful, but the other ones usually then push it towards the middle. Yeah, he's terrible, but look at the context. Or yeah, he's brilliant, but he didn't actually intend to do that, and that sort of stuff. So, the sort of ways we can judge them. Just by looking at his actions. Look at this thing, is it good? Now this has the danger of presentism, a word I've never been massively happy with, but it is a real word I am told. The idea that we are projecting our moral value system of today onto the past. How can we judge him by our moral standards today? So this has deep problems in it. But you can say, oh look, the Boer War was bad, but then judge it by the concept of the morality of the time. But then we're judging by context. So you can say, look at this, this is good, this is bad. Now certain things, it's obvious. You can point and go, that's not great. No matter how you try and spin it, this is a failure. Or no matter how you spin it, that's impressive. Okay? If we're getting now even more complicated, we can then say, well, look at his intentions and his aims. If his intention is to create a laissez-faire economic system, can we say it's a failure, the fact he doesn't increase government action? Because that's not his aim. Why are we judging him in his inability to create a welfare state if he never intended to create a welfare state? Now, if he intended to win the tariff debate, he's a failure because, as you can tell, it's an absolute disaster. But that's because he intended it. If he didn't intend to make a welfare state, is it fair for us to say he's a failure because he did not make a welfare state, for example? So by judging him by his aims, he intended to do this, 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 and this. He achieved each of these by this much. Or look at this really bad thing he did. Like he, I don't know, didn't make that much reform on alcohol legislation, or didn't make so much reform on Chinese slavery. But most people, he didn't really care about that stuff. So why is it a failure that he didn't do anything about it? Yeah, we can't judge him by that. And the other one is his context. Now this is the easiest one, but also the one you can have most fun with, fun in inverted commas. Essentially, this is the idea that considering what is going on at the time, considering the moral beliefs of people at the time, considering the circumstances around what's happening, could someone have done better, or is considering what's going on at the time, actually, even though he didn't do very much, it's quite good. Yeah. So Boer War, absolute disaster, but considering by his context, he wasn't in control of the Boer War. That was his generals who were mucking it up. Okay, so can we blame him entirely for it? So this is what you really need to think about. Rather than simply go, oh, that's a bad thing that he is bad, you need to say, well, but was that his aim? Is it inherently good or bad? And look at the context, etc. Now, I'm not going to give you the specifics of all of these. You need to make sure you have the specifics of all of these. But the key events we've mentioned: the Boer War, Chinese slavery, Taff Vale, Education Act, Licence Act, and Irish Land Act. So, what are his aims? We're going to break it down like this. Aim number 1, laissez-faire government, continuing laissez-faire government. Fine. Aim number 2, keeping the Conservative Party elected. That's fairly sort of fair one. Aim number 3, strengthen the national government, strengthen the sort of nationalistic, patriotic, make the Britain stronger argument. Aside from that, he isn't pushing welfare, he isn't pushing reforms, etc., etc. He wants to strengthen the country, get elected, and generally keep a laissez-faire policy. Okay, so Boer War, yes, it doesn't help but make his country look effective. It shows the country is weak. It therefore causes problems. It therefore does not appreciate his aim. But given the context of the war is being lost in South Africa by his generals. Yeah, he's not dictating military policy. He's entrusted that to the general. Is it desirable that this Prime Minister without any military experience takes over and goes, you know what, I tell you what to do fighting-wise? No, probably not. So actually, how much can we blame him for the fact that Boer War continues? We can say, well, it's unpopular. That's why it's bad. Well, it wasn't unpopular in 1902, the khaki election. In fact, the Conservatives won 1902 really, really easily because they said, vote for us and we'll continue the Boer War. And everyone was like, I like a bit of killing Boers, so yes, crack on. Okay, so it was popular. If you want to show off, you can say, well, actually, yeah, it was popular in 1902, but when it dragged on, sorry for the siren, I live in a terrifying area, when it drags on, what happens is it suddenly becomes unpopular. And and then it started hurting his party, hurting his image. Perhaps his failure wasn't to start the war, but his failure was not to end it when it started hurting his government. But then you might want back to that. Is it right to end the war just for political reasons? Question mark. Discuss. Okay. So the Boer War, we're not simply going, oh, there is a war and people do not like it and therefore it is bad. We're saying, well, he's not really responsible for it. And actually, people quite like it in the early years. It drags on. Maybe he should have ended it sooner. But then again, that goes against his image of wanting to be a powerful, and his aim of wanting to be a powerful leader. So that way, actually, it swings and roundabouts. So we could still give it, but no one's going to say that the Boer War is a success. But you can say it's less of a failure than it's often painted. And always do that, by the way. Shaft your rivals. Everyone's going to go, the Boer War was good and it was bad because it was this, etc. So if you swoop in and this examiner's read 100 scripts all saying the Boer War is bad because people died and people were unhappy, and you swoop in and say, well, obviously, nothing inherently bad about Boer War. Actually, the failure was a political one. And actually, you can't even blame him for the military failures because it wasn't him. Then naturally, this person who has read mind has gone blank with endless of inert analyses of the Boer War, will then go, oh, this is a candidate who knows what they're doing, and therefore reward somewhat irrationally. Right, so hopefully you've got the point on how we are deconstructing and showing off a little bit with these arguments. I'm going to rush through these, but always, I'm not going to cover them all, so always apply these logic to yourself. Chinese slavery, again, he didn't do Chinese slavery. Okay, this was a stick which was used to hit him with. Okay, now arguably, like the Boer War, this is a political failure as opposed to a policy failure. It wasn't his policy to do that, really. It was his colonial office. Now, he got the blame for it to some extent, but that's, you know, neither here nor there. He probably should have cracked down on it sooner because it hurt him politically, but can we blame him for the actual crisis itself? Not really. Let's also bear in mind, most people don't actually care about Chinese slavery in terms of, there are some middle class sort of moralists, religious types, who they are concerned by this. They're concerned with the idea of sort of slavery being sort of created again, racial inequality, etc. But in this era, even the left, which perhaps in the 1970s makes its name on racial equality, doesn't care about the racial arguments. The left is angry about Chinese slavery because it's replacing unionized white labor who earn money with cheaper foreign labor. If that's allowed to continue, and if that's allowed to replicate itself in England, that means the unions will then be attacked. Yeah, if you let poor white people have their jobs taken by cheaper foreigners, then that does not help poor white people. That means they lose their jobs. So they don't like this, not because of the moral Chinese slavery thing of it. They don't like it because it threatens their jobs. So this is their big argument. And many natural Tory supporters don't see it as a huge issue. It's not great, but it doesn't massively see them as an issue. So although it's a bad thing, it's not necessarily a morally bad thing in terms of the political effects. But it hurts him politically, and he probably shouldn't have happened. But he's been a bit unlucky with this more than anything else. Again, Taff Vale. Taff Vale was a court decision. He did not create Taff Vale. But he did not legislate around Taff Vale. If Taff Vale, we're not going to go into it, but obviously it's about massively destroying the powers of unions. Before Taff Vale, unions did not have a really big reason to get into Parliament because they didn't trust Parliament. They thought Parliament was rigged against them, so they would get changes on an individual level with the bosses of businesses. Taff Vale is a court approval, a court decision, which could destroy trade unions as a force. The only way to reverse a legal decision is making a new law. Now, Balfour could have made a new law to allow it, and that would have meant that as trade unionists, in theory, would have gone, you know what, tell you what, like, it's been reversed, there's not a big issue, let's just carry on as we've been going forward. Because they've not been convinced about the arguments that one should have a political party, and they don't massively support the idea of a Labour Party yet. But because Taff Vale happens, and because Balfour just sort of says, oh, that's a thing that's happened, so, well, bad luck, the unionists have to get more politically involved. They have to now get this Taff Vale decision reversed. They will only get it reversed by Parliament voting it in, a new act to make it legal to do the strikes, etc. The only way you do that is getting represented in Parliament. The only way you get represented in Parliament is getting parties sympathetic to you elected. So suddenly trade unions, with their money, with their organisation and ability to get people out to the ballot box, get turnout, you're part of a union, you are being called up and made sure you vote the right way and vote for the right person. We call this machine politics. Because they are the political machine, you have now got an enemy of the Tory party who wants to create a far more unionist, union-friendly political laws. You've got these people now supporting the idea of a Labour Party and also supporting the Liberals in order to get change to this law. You have now empowered your opponents. So Taff Vale isn't a mistake because of the decision. Balfour had no control over the decision. It's a mistake because he allowed it to stand. That therefore means the unions become political against him, and that hurts him. Okay. Education Act, Licensing and Irish Licensing Act are seen as failures because by these sort of moralistic and religious nonconformists, Education Act because it essentially seems to be giving government funding to Anglican schools. If you are a non-conformist religious group, this is a threat because this therefore might lead the way to all schools being Anglican and therefore all other religious schools not having their own funding and therefore an official state religion, and therefore if you're a Quaker, you're a Catholic, you're a Methodist, you are therefore under threat. And Licensing Act, although it actually was intended to reduce the amount of drinking, because it paid off brewers and because it gave people lots of money and lots of loopholes, it was seen as actually a nice thing to brewers. And again, the moralistic, temperance sort of middle classes opposed Balfour. The big thing to point out of these two, though, is these people who disagree with this, the non-conformists and the moralists, naturally support the Liberal Party anyway. So it actually hasn't lost Balfour many votes. Arguably, it helps gather support for the Liberals and means these people are more likely to vote and support the Liberals, and it helps empower the Liberals, but it doesn't necessarily weaken the Tory vote. And that's a common thing for all these things. Boer War, Chinese slavery, Taff Vale, all these acts, they don't really lose too many votes, maybe with the exception of the Boer War. But what they do is they help strengthen the number of people who are getting out and voting for the Liberals. Last one is the Irish Land Act. Arguably this is a success because it delays any real problems in Ireland for a decade, but it really annoys his own party. But actually is a relatively reasonable development. So in reality, if we look at just the policies, on the surface, we can't really say he's made too many policy mistakes. The bad things aren't usually his fault. His action, his problems, his errors are more about his inaction, or just the fact that he's annoyed groups who are always going to be annoyed anyway, than anything else. Okay? If we judge him by his aims, has he kept a laissez-faire government? Yes. Has he strengthened the British Empire? Not so great. But arguably the Irish Land Act has helped to keep Ireland part of the British Empire for longer. Has he kept himself elected? Has he helped the Tory party get elected? He's a failure. So we can judge him as perhaps not necessarily as a policy failure, more of a political failure in that regard. And we can say, if we think about the 1906, why did the 1906 happen, and we think about the Balfour paragraph, we can point out these events certainly don't help Balfour get support, but they don't necessarily lose him much support. They more empower his opposition. I mean, naturally he's losing votes all the time through this, particularly the Boer War and Taff Vale loses a lot of working class patriotic opinion from him. But ultimately it's not critically damaging to him. Okay, but what it does do, and what is damaging, is that the Liberals now have lots of supporters, unionists, moralists, religious nonconformists, joining over and combining with them. So, the Balfour government arguably is a failure, but not necessarily because of it makes constant policy mistakes. Essentially, you can argue, because of the changes to the attitude towards poverty, there is a more progressive zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is sort of feeling in society, ideas in society of what's good and bad. Essentially, because he does not tap into this, he loses votes. Because people's attitudes are changing towards poverty, people's attitudes towards national efficiency are changing. And he has not really produced anything to capture that. Because he does not produce anything, the Liberals can turn up and say, well, look, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they naturally get that vote. He's basically not competed that new progressive zeitgeist. Additionally, arguably his actions has alienated some people away from his base, so they either will go and vote for Liberals, or they will just not vote at all at the next election because they look at what Balfour has done and think he's an idiot, and or made people who either voted Conservative now vote Liberals, or just as commonly or more commonly, made people who are sympathetic to Liberals but don't love them, so therefore don't always turn out to vote. Elections are about turnout as much as it is about support. It makes them go and support the Liberals. Yeah, so it's more of an indirect effect than the simple, they don't like the Conservatives, they vote for Liberals. Arguably, one of his biggest successes is by picking on certain issues such as the role of the war, and failing that, and picking on the ideas of slavery, and picking on unionism, and picking on temperance, and picking on religion. These are issues which the Liberals all kind of agree on. And so now the government's picking fights. The Liberals can say, oh yes, we don't like the idea of religion in schools being picked by the state, and actually everyone should have their own religious schools, etc., etc., etc. And therefore make everyone go, yeah, Liberals are good, we should go with the Liberals, and then make everyone essentially combine and join the Liberals. The Liberal weakness is their lack of unity. They are a more progressive force. They want to make changes to society more. However, the problem with being a party of change is everyone has different opinions on what should be changed. And therefore, from the 1880s to the 1900s, the Liberal Party was fundamentally divided over so many issues, the empire, etc., and divided over what should be changed. And therefore, it was a really terrible political force. It did not make any did not really compete many elections. It was didn't have a common message, and therefore it didn't win many elections because it hadn't really proven what it stood for, because it was so divided. Balfour basically produces all these issues that all the Liberals can go, oh yeah, we agree on this, let's get in and talk about this, and helps Liberal unity. As well as this, and I would say arguably one of the biggest effects, is although the government on its own, and none of these things really does stuff which is critically wrong, arguably Boer War isn't great, the fact there are so many little crises and so few positive look what we have done gives this impression of a government that's lost its direction, lost its way, bogged down in crises rather than making actual changes, rather than improving the country. Compare that to the Liberals who, because of new liberalism, which we will actually discuss in the next video lesson, and because of the changes to the leadership and because of changes within the party, are much more confident. So now your election choices in 1906 are between a party which hasn't really achieved very much, and hasn't really massively given a good impression. It just constantly makes mistakes and causes fights, to a party who has a grand vision tapping into the zeitgeist at the time. So actually it provides if it does not provide the image of a confident or competent government, which therefore means when the election comes, it has not got the sympathy of the public. So if you're asking the question, therefore, why did the Tories lose in 1906, there are three arguments. Number one, Balfour mucked up. Okay, you pick your policies, look at this, he mishandled this bad. This causes him to lose the election because. An argument, other one says that other people in the party to blame, and that's a tariff dispute, which we're going to do next in about 10 seconds, which is Joseph Chamberlain. Or you can argue that actually, because of the political changes around poverty, because of the political changes in the increase in working class vote, because of the changes to the socio-economic situation, and therefore people are increasingly concerned about poverty, etc., etc., there are naturally more people sympathising with slightly more left-wing ideas. And Balfour does not really deliver this, and the Conservative Party does not really deliver this, because ideologically they're not ready to, they don't want to. And therefore, Liberals are more naturally, because there are increasing poor people voting, increasing unions getting involved, because this is happening naturally, Liberals are now naturally the party increasingly of government. So actually the government, Tories, are the party of the rich and of the elite, and when the elite and the rich are in charge and dominate, that's fine in the 19th century, but in the 20th century, where the working classes are more important, the middle classes are more important, Liberals then tend to dominate because they are the party of that. Or a combination of them all. We like combinations in history. So, tariff reform. Now this could be part of why did they lose in 1906. This could be part of was Balfour a failure, or this could be its own question on its own. In fact, the character in a tariff dispute is Joseph Chamberlain. He is not a Conservative. He is a Liberal Unionist. Okay, so previously Liberal, departed over issues of tariff reforms, empire, etc., with the Liberal line, and therefore represented around 60 to 80 MPs, depending on the election, who naturally allied with the Tories. Now, the Tories, actually, official name today, are the Conservative and the Unionist Party, because they eventually combined properly. So therefore, Chamberlain, being a man from Birmingham, a man from a business background as opposed to an aristocratic one, which in the Conservative Party at the time was very rare, and he was a Liberal Unionist, he was an outsider. He was a populist because he was liberal, and actually he was more of a man of the people than anyone else in the Tory party. And he was an imperialist, part of the reason he left the Liberals. He also was a massive supporter of protectionism. Now we're going to talk about what that means in a second if you're not sure, but we'll do that in a bit. Essentially, in 1902, there are various affronts. The government makes many reforms without consulting him, even in his own department as minister. And Balfour doesn't trust him and basically treats him really badly, does that sort of stuff, slights him. In the end, the final straw is the corn tariff. In 1903, Balfour gets rid of the corn tariff. It was a nominal fee, it didn't actually make much money or didn't have much effect, but it was a symbolic gesture of like, we have a corn tariff, we are still a little bit protectionist. But they get rid of it, wasn't making much money, didn't make a big deal, no one really noticed. But Chamberlain was not consulted, and that can be seen as a personal affront. Chamberlain is known as a protectionist. He is known as someone who values his stuff. The fact Balfour decided to get rid of it without even talking to him about it shows that actually the low respect that Joseph Chamberlain is held in, and no respect that the idea of protectionism is held in. So his counterpoint is to go, no, we need to have tariffs. Okay? And he will say what the tariffs will look like is actually imperial preference. Okay, we're going to explain why tariffs and that stuff, but he's a man who comes up with imperial preference. It has been argued, although not proven, but argued, that the reason that he pushes tariff dispute is because he wants to become leader. A wedge issue is a wedge is like a small bit of triangular bit of wood. Is something where once that issue people are either for or against. There's no middle ground, right? There are lots of issues. If we talk about, I'm going to do British examples, but in America, gay marriage is one of them, for example. Okay, Trump, arguably, is a wedge issue. I've now dated the podcast, the video. Whoever is also the next president is also a wedge issue. Therefore, you can argue that he has brought up the issue of tariffs because Balfour is not massively pro-protectionist, but a lot of the party are. So if he brings up protectionism and makes a fight about protectionism, what will happen is Balfour would have to say, well, actually, maybe we don't want so much protectionism. Which means that if you are a Conservative MP or Conservative member and you like protectionism, you have two choices. Joseph Chamberlain, who supports protectionism and he's a good chap, or Balfour, who is not against protectionism and therefore bad chap. And so this will naturally get Joseph Chamberlain quite a lot of support and therefore make him a viable candidate for leader. Now, that's not proven, but that's an argument. So, very complicated diagram. Essentially, you have motor cars in America because they are more efficient, because they have machine tools, because they are more skilled, whatever it is. They make a car for £100. They also make corn for £10. In Britain, we are less efficient. We use less sophisticated technique. We are less well run, etc., etc., etc. We make our cars for £115 and our corn for £14. What a tariff does is it says that for certain goods we will increase. If you want to bring it into the country, there is a tax. So cars are taxed at plus 25%. Corn is taxed at plus 50%. Okay. What this will do will mean if you're the average consumer, before tariffs, you will go, oh, right, I'm going to go for the American car because it's cheaper. Now, because of tariffs, okay, the price of the American car is £125. The price of the British car is £115. So you go for the British car. Because of tariffs, the price of the food is, you've got a choice between £15 or £14. You'll go for the £14. So now people are naturally buying more British goods. Who is this great for? This is great for the farmers because they are now selling more food. Yeah, they are not being outcompeted by the Canadians. That's the Canadian flag, by the way, in this period. They're not being outcompeted by the Canadians. Yeah, they are selling more stuff. This is great news for the car owners, car manufacturing owners, apologies, the car businesses, and the various other businesses who are saved by tariffs. They are selling more of their stuff, and therefore making more money. And it's good for their workers, arguably. This is why the Lancashire cotton millers are naturally weirdly have a weird stance on this issue, whereas other factory workers in Birmingham are massively pork protectionist. Essentially, this is great if you sell stuff. If you buy the stuff, if you need food to live, and actually tariffs don't help your business carry on going, or you've got a slightly more short-term but I need to eat tomorrow mentality, your food prices have gone up. If you're a worker, before tariffs you paid a tenner. After tariffs you now pay £14 for your food. That has an increase in food. That means you have less money to spend on nice things. So if you are middle class and therefore less dependent on industries which make tariffs, or if you're working class and you need to eat, you don't like tariffs because they increase your cost of living. This explains the dichotomy between them. Now, essentially, Chamberlain, actually we'll go back to this. Chamberlain says we need tariffs, but he realizes that most of the 19th century was a battle over tariffs. From the Corn Laws in the 1840s, 1850s, all the way up until the 1880s, there was a battle over should we have tariffs, should we not? And the Liberals had won. The Liberals would say no tariffs, we don't want tariffs. Liberals won the argument because they convinced the average people that they were worse off by having stuff more expensive than they were for being guaranteed jobs because now those businesses exist. Partly because if Britain has tariffs, then America will have tariffs against Britain, and therefore the Americans won't buy the British cars, which means that the British cars don't actually sell as much stuff to America. So yes, you've gained jobs because you're selling cars to British people, but you've lost jobs because you're not selling as many cars to American people, etc. Therefore, Chamberlain can't then rock up and say, tell you what, great idea, totally new, tariffs. Brilliant, because everyone will remember what was said and what was in the 1880s and 1870s and go, no, tariffs are bad. What he proposes is imperial preference. So imperial preference is the idea of we'll have tariffs, but if you are in the empire, you do not have to pay them. So we have tariffs, but it's not a tariff all around Britain, it's a tariff all around the empire. So if we look at this diagram here, if you are buying a car, America is not part of the empire, tragically, and therefore it will get 20 plus 25%. So you'll buy a British car. But Canada is part of the empire. You still get the corn at £10 because it's not got a tariff because it's part of the empire. Imperial preference. Therefore, this is like tariffs light. Yes, we have tariffs, but it won't actually affect food because the empire trades with us mostly food. The empire has very few factories. So actually, the food argument is less strong. That's his argument. Plus, it's quite patriotic, imperial preference, empire, rule Britannia, etc., etc. So he is trying to be very clever here. And what he's trying to do with imperial preference is he's trying to say we'll have the best bits of tariffs without all the food prices rising. Plus, the empire, glory, glory, hallelujah, rule Britannia, etc., etc. This is designed to turn tariffs into a popular issue. Additionally, he really encourages, although he's never officially part of, a massive public campaign. People's default is tariffs are bad because that's what was agreed and that's what was decided in the 1880s and 1890s. He needs to convince people that tariffs are good. And to convince them, you can't just rock up onto a stage one day in Birmingham and say, tariffs are good, we're going to have imperial preference. And everyone across the entire country will go, okay, yes, fine. Because you need to convince them, plus they need to hear about it. They need to hear your arguments. So there is a massive increase, and if you ever get a source question on this, you will have a poster or something as part of this debate. There's a massive publicity drive with Chamberlain as the big centerpiece, trying to educate and train people to believe that tariffs are good and can help them. The costs will not outweigh the benefits. Okay. He also then tries to push more and more populism by saying, well, actually, some of the money we get in tax we use to pay for pensions. I.e., if you are poor, not only will the food prices not be that big, but also with the money will give you a free pension. So that's good. So you can join it. Okay. However, he then had to double back on that because someone said, hang on, if that's the case, then all the middle classes who don't need pensions are going to lose out. So actually what he'll do is he'll spend that money to mean that you don't have to have as much duties on tea and sugar, which means tea and sugar will be cheaper. Duties are like taxes when you import. Okay, so that will help the middle classes, make the middle classes happier. The fact that he flip-flopped from one to the other means that neither is truly believed. Had he just picked one, if with that money we get from the tariffs, we will then pay for the duties on sugar and tea, which means therefore the sugar and tea doesn't actually have any duties on it, which means it's cheaper, that means you can have more of it. Middle class people, hooray. Or if you give tariffs, we'll give you pensions. Poor people, hooray. Had he picked one and run with it, or half of both, it would have been more effective than saying this, maybe this, because it allows his opponents to say he hasn't made up his mind, and therefore he's just lying. Someone who completely changes their policies all the time is difficult to trust. And essentially what happens is there's this huge circuit to try and educate people. There's something called the Tariff Reform League, who really focuses on Chamberlain because he's a popular figure, okay, but although he did not join. And there's a massive modern mass campaign, lots of posters, lots of speaking, lots of newspapers. However, he fails. The debate is lost. And when we look at why, if we look at the people in society, who is naturally sympathetic to tariff reform? Well, upper class landowners, yes, they will go tariff reform is good, but they have less invested in actually winning, and therefore less actively likely to fund and support it, because they own land, they make money from food. But imperial preference means that they are still going to be outcompeted by the Canadian and Australian corn, and therefore actually tariffs won't help them. So they're supportive, but they don't love it. The working classes are indifferent either way because they are apolitical because they don't have the vote, but also they tend not to be reached by newspapers because they can't afford it. They tend not to go to public rallies, and they tend not to be in areas where there is active campaigning. People don't bother to send speakers to working class areas because they can't vote and they don't matter. Now the industrialists love it, obviously, and there's lots of support there, but the working classes were not convinced, and that was the problem. Essentially, with all this campaigning, the Liberals managed to counter this with, well, again, Liberals are divided, but the one thing they all agree on is free trade. By starting an argument about free trade, this is a huge thing, it allows the Liberals to unify in a way that they have not been unified since the 1860s. Yeah? Everyone in the Liberal Party, no matter their huge, fundamental, sweeping and ultimately self-destructive divisions, everyone agrees that free trade is good. And therefore, free trade is under attack. We will unite to defend free trade. And therefore, a united party then will run into an election in 1906, a couple of years later, far more likely to win. Because if you're united, you can agree on stuff. If you agree on stuff, you have a common policy. If you have a common policy, you're far more organised and more likely to get elected. So what essentially happens, the Liberals push out the idea of a liberal loaf, and they basically, wherever Chamberlain goes, David Lloyd George or Churchill or someone follows them and speaks the next day or the next few days. And essentially, Chamberlain is only one man. The Liberal machine has lots more speakers, and also is united against it. The Conservative Party has some free traders, has some protectionists. Balfour, because he wants to keep a middle line, doesn't support either really publicly, which means there's not a party machine supporting the idea of tariff reform. So what happens is that if you break it down, people are naturally anti-tariff reform, so you've got to do much more to persuade them to change their minds than to keep their own prejudices. Okay, not enough people are actually helped by tariff reform to want to support it. David Chamberlain is good, but he's basically on his own. He does not have the Conservative Party really helping him, although he has supporters. So therefore, his campaigning is less effective. And the opposition is much stronger because they are unified, they are much more effective, and they have much more supporters organised around them, and therefore they can adequately battle the publicity campaign of Chamberlain. So what happens is the working class aren't convinced. Farm labourers understand that perhaps they'll do well because of tariffs, but again, because they don't really vote, it doesn't really matter. Cotton workers in Lancashire, previously solidly Tory, they realise that if they make their money by selling cloths abroad. If Britain has tariffs, other countries will start tariffs against Britain. Lancashire cotton workers and cotton owners, mill owners, know that if other countries increase tariffs, the cotton industry, which is on its last legs anyway, will simply disappear. They'll all lose their jobs, because plus 50% on British cotton, which already isn't selling very well, will mean no one's going to buy British cotton, and because British cotton is mostly an export industry, they are going to pretty much be doomed. City of London naturally likes lots of investment from abroad, doesn't like government intervention. Yeoman farmers are the small landowners, the same as upper class landowners. They like the idea, but it doesn't massively excite them. And working class artisans, food prices go up. They are not convinced by Chamberlain's arguments for all the reasons I've mentioned. So therefore, what we see is a lack of support for tariff reform, and therefore the issue temporarily dies. But it also has a fundamentally negative political effect. Arguably, this leads to 1906. More than anything Balfour actually does. So if you want to be smug and say, well, actually, it is conservative policy, but not that whole Balfour, who's at best a laissez-faire man in a period of progressive era. No, no, no. It is Joseph Chamberlain and his self-destructive vanity project for leadership. It's a bit harsh to Joseph Chamberlain, but you can argue that. Because what this does is Balfour cannot take a side. He has strong free traders on his party. He has strong protectionists in his party. If the leader takes a side, naturally the other side will not be happy and they'll try and get rid of him. So Balfour cannot take a side. So he has this really weird intermediary position where he says, well, what we'll do is we won't have tariffs unless someone tariffs us first, and in retaliation we'll tariff them. So little bit of tariffs, with a moral argument behind it. This does not keep anyone happy. This only angers people. This only means that the party is unhappy, but it does help keep the party together. Yeah? If Balfour goes for free trade, then the protectionists might split off and make their own party. If he goes for protectionism, the free traders might split off and join the Liberals. Not great. Either way, he's in a bad position. And although the retaliatory tariffs do not give people confidence in him, everyone sees him as a lightweight because he's not taking a side, he's just sat on the fence. It does not convince anyone, and it hurts him politically. It does not actually massively, it's actually probably in the long term better, because what it does is it essentially means that he keeps the party together. Arguably as well, the Conservatives go into 1906 divided. There are protectionists and there are free traders. None of them trust each other. None of them really trust Balfour. And so when you go into an election divided, you cannot really have a clear set of policies to stand upon. No one trusts each other. And more than that, you can't really, if you don't have a clear set of policies, you can't have modern advertisement of what you stand for. Yeah, you can't stand for anything if you can't agree on what you stand for. Which means that you don't have a platform for people to encourage them to vote for you. Compare that to the Liberals, who have the new Liberal platform. Again, you've got a choice between a party who are like, well, yeah, so we don't stand for liberalism, full stop, and a party who is actually promising change and stuff. More than this, the real effect of the tariff debate, yes, it weakens the Conservatives, is to strengthen the Liberals, another indirect effect. Essentially, it does three major things. The Liberals did not have something popular to stand on, and now the Tories have given them tariff reform. Yeah, tariff reform was not an issue. Had the Tories not done this, if the Liberals have gone, yeah, we don't want tariffs, well, no one cares because no one's saying there's tariffs. But now there is tariffs and protections being suggested. They can come out and they can go, we are anti-tariff, pro-free trade. This naturally, therefore, means that many people who supported the Tories, for example, the cotton workers in Lancashire, people who are liberal unionists, liberals but have gone over for imperial reasons as opposed to economic reasons, middle-class people who liked and sympathetic to the idea of free trade, and even Tories MPs, such as Churchill, who was a Tory MP and then turned to a Liberal MP. He'll turn back to a Tory MP, don't worry. They all now have a platform to go, vote for me, you voted for the Tories last time, vote for us because we will give you free trade and that's what matters to you. So it means that that helps gather support. More than that, everyone will get, well, Some people get that one. To show off even further, you can say, well, it does. More importantly, the Liberals spend the last 20 years, 1880 to 1900, divided over so many issues. When their core issue, the issue which made them Liberals, the modern Liberal Party was founded on the issue of tariffs, that issue is attacked without them even asking for it to be attacked. They unify around this issue. All the Liberals can agree that free trade is good and protectionism is bad. So therefore, they are unified. A unified party can then better fight an election because they can agree on policy, they are coordinated, they are organised. This is the era before mass media. If you want to get elections, you have to have hundreds of people going out to all the different constituencies giving speaking tours. No one owns a TV, they don't exist. No one owns a radio, well, most people don't own radios. Okay, there are prototypes. National newspapers are there, but again, not massively in circulation. Okay, if you want to win elections, you've got to get posters out, you've got to get campaigners knocking on doors, you've got to send hundreds of people doing hundreds of speeches every day. You need organisation for that. You need a common policy for that. The Tories, because they're divided on tariffs, do not have that. The Liberals, because they are unified, do have that. And additionally, the LRC, the Labour Representation Committee, early Labour Party, also support the idea of free trade. They are not convinced by the idea that it will help protect jobs. And therefore, because both parties agree on free trade, they work together on it, and it helps solidify their relationship. Okay, it helps them get together and gives them an issue to then sit and meet on, and it shows that they have a lot in common. Arguably, this can be used then to combine them in the future and make one massive mega centre-left party, which will never lose. So, Balfour government, a lot of stuff there. You need to find the specific facts to prove about the tariff debate, etc., and also what he did. The headlines are: Balfour is a failure, and you cannot argue he is necessarily a success. But you can defend him and say, well, actually it wasn't his policies, or it's more his reaction to stuff, and it's more judging him by his aims. Actually, considering the context, it wasn't so bad. But actually, all of this definitely doesn't help him win 1906, although it probably isn't as significant in losing support as many people make out, because actually many of the people it loses support from will never vote for him anyway. And the big thing, the tariff debate, is fundamental in splitting the party, fundamental in weakening the Tories, fundamental in unifying the Liberals and gaining them a base of support. And I would therefore contend that if you are going to do about Conservative actions in the 1906, why did 1906 happen, you will emphasise, mention Balfour's policies, but emphasise the tariff debate particularly. Until next time, I will see you discussing, this time, new liberalism. Thank you very much.